Is your team working on producing software and it feels like you just keep cranking out features, but the value that's actually provided by those features is really low? The business isn't really becoming more successful. They're not hitting better outcomes, and nobody's really getting the rewards that you'd hope on your software development projects. Well, stay tuned, because today we're going to talk about how to shut down a feature factory if you're working in one, and how you can get people more focused on actually hitting business outcomes with the products that we design and develop, so that we can all benefit from the work that we do to develop software. Hi, I'm Jamie Edwards, and I help software development teams and software companies to do a better job releasing their software, understanding what it is that their customers really want, and having an environment where people can be as creative and innovative as possible. Today we're going to talk about how to shut down a feature factory if you're working on one, and how you can be a lot more happy and fulfilled with developing software on your team if you're able to help the business understand how to be more realistic about how they actually release changes to their customers. So first of all, what is a feature factory? Well, I want to refer you to the person who essentially coined the term. His name's John Cutler, and he's a senior product manager at Zendesk. He wrote an article late last year that went viral that kind of introduced this term he came up with, a feature factory, to the general population of software developers and product managers and professionals that work together to produce software. It's honestly one of the best articles I've read, and he's done a whole series of articles on how to actually correct feature factories and kind of start getting the mindset of the organization to switch away from getting work done quickly as the way that we focus on knowing that we're making an impact to the business and to our customer, and focusing instead on things that we can actually measure. So I would encourage you, I'll include some links below the video, to look up John. Watch some of the videos he's done. He's done some presentations I've seen online at some other conferences where he talks about this in more detail. He's really the person that you should go to get full detail on this concept of a feature factory. But today I wanted to give you a little bit of background on my understanding of feature factory. When I first read his article, I have to say pretty much everything in it resounded with me. And I think if you're somebody out there who's worked on developing software products, maybe you're a product manager or you're a tech lead or you're an operations person, everybody on a whole team that works to develop software suffers when this sort of feature factory setup is in place. So just to be clear before I launch into this, from my impression, really what a feature factory is, if we're to boil it down, and again, I would encourage you to go read John's much more thorough set of articles about this, but really when I think about it, putting it very simply, it's an organization that doesn't know how to measure the impact of the work they're doing. Now that sounds insane, and it really is, but you would not believe, in the 20 years that I've been doing consulting and working with software companies to produce products, how prevalent this really is, that people do a whole bunch of upfront planning, build something, take a long time to build it, throw it out there, and they don't really have a measurable way of knowing if the thing that they built actually hit the outcomes that they want. So the first thing that we need to start to think about, if we're going to close down a feature factory and stop just cranking out features, and letting the number and quantity and speed at which the team produces features be the thing that the business measures us on, instead switching over to the thing that the business measures us on are the decisions that the product management team, and maybe the whole team if it's a more cross-functional team that's all being involved in product management decisions, are those decisions that are being made actually leading to making decisions that direct the product into where it's going to provide the most value for its customers and actually cause the company to profit, so that it makes more money and all the people who did the work can actually get raises and rewards for their hard work. Now, when you think about setting a measurable goal, the measurable goal some people might think of is, we need to have 15 features done by next week, or we might need to have the version 3.0 release done in a year. This is how some companies plan products, and you can go back and watch my videos on lean software development. I'll talk a lot about why this is such a problem, but really, what's different about setting measurable goals is, if you think back when you were in maybe high school, if you took, let's say, a chemistry or a physics class or something like that, they taught you the scientific method. And it's been years since I learned this, so this is kind of going to be a little rusty for me, but if you think about it at just a really high level, somebody has a theory. They think something's true in the universe. You know, it could be something about the qualities of a stone or a rock or something like that. It could be something about physics. In this case, it's something about our customer. We have a theory that something's valuable to our customer. So the next step in the scientific process is really to figure out, how am I going to measure or observe whether that's true? So coming up with, what are some things I'm going to do at the end of this experiment that are going to give me a yes or a no? Then we're going to figure out, how are we going to actually run or build the experiment? And then when the experiment's complete, how much data do we need to gather? How long do we need that experiment to run until we get the adequate amount of information and feedback back that we can say confidently that that change either was a good change or a bad change? The second thing we can do to really close down and shut down feature factories is, I believe, to help teams be more cross-functional about how they do work. You can go back and watch my video on the journey to cross-functional teams, where I talk a lot more about sort of the journey that your team or your company may need to go through to get people to be more dedicated and focused to a product effort. When there are subject matter experts or people who are looked at in a company as they are the representative of the customer, it really sort of places a boundary, even if it's not a real boundary, it might be just sort of a felt or perceived boundary between that subject matter expert and all the people doing the work. And so the people doing the work don't really feel very empowered to be part of the decision-making process in not just how things get built, but what. What experiments are we going to run with the customer? What theories of value do we have that we think if we run an experiment, we can cheaply get a yes or no and actually get some return on investment for our changes? So go back and watch that video. I really think if you have teams that are very splintered into disciplines, you have silos, like there's the dev department and the operations department and the UX department, it becomes very difficult to get out of this feature factory sort of mindset, because it all then becomes about efficiency of communication across teams from management standpoint. And often that will create sort of the psychological or behavioral and cultural conditions at a company that really prevents them from actually focusing on business outcomes and instead focus heavily on the efficiency of work. One of the things John Cutler focuses on in his articles, at least the first one, and I thought this was a really good point, and I've thought about this quite a bit myself as well, is if you have a team that begins to release their software much more quickly and they're experimenting, many of the releases that go out in front of the customer will not have the business outcome that everybody's hoping for. And so if a team celebrates today, goes out to maybe a happy hour, or maybe the company sends them to a retreat. There's a lot of different ways that software companies will celebrate success with their teams. If the way that they're doing that now is based off of a release, well, you can't exactly celebrate 5 to 7 times a day if you get into a situation where you're now doing DevOps, and you can go back and watch my video on continuous delivery where I talk more about that. Instead, it makes more sense, and this is what John talked about, and I really agree with him on this, that a team instead should go out and celebrate when a business outcome is hit. There's a couple reasons why this is really valuable. One is that it's not success theater, as he talks about in his original article. It's not just going out, hey, we did some work on time. I mean, that's great, but who cares if the work that we did was on time if it provided no value to our customer, it didn't actually generate more revenue for the business? Those are the things that we should be celebrating about. So one of the things that you can do really easy to start to set the expectation on your teams and in the culture at the company to align it more with an outcome-based way of doing work instead of a feature and effort and efficiency-based way of doing work is to try to motivate the team. We want to hit a business outcome. We don't care if we need to pivot. We need to try things with our customer. We may release 20 times and fail to meet the business outcome until that 21st time. But that's the way we're going to work now, because we actually want to deliver the right thing to the customer. And often the right thing is something that a subject matter expert or a product manager or UX people who do, observation types of studies, they won't glean that simply from observation. and competitive analysis. They actually have to put a minimum viable product, or at least some aspect of their idea, in front of the customer, and then the customer often comes back and says, that's not what I wanted. Well, that's exactly what we want. We want customers to tell us when we're not delivering the right thing early in the project and not at the end when there's no budget left to actually accommodate it. The next and probably most important thing you can do to shut down a feature factory is to make it safe for people to learn and to fail. Today, when we plan a project that takes 6 months, 3 months, a quarter, a year to deliver, all that time, there's assumptions about what's being built being valuable, and we don't, as a team, have to know whether that's true until it's actually released. And I've seen many teams where a product manager or somebody like this, a chief product owner or something like that, makes a lot of decisions about a product, and they budget, let's say, $3 million to build a product or a release. And they have their job, everything's secure, they've done a lot of research, they've made these decisions, and they go along building that product, and it may take them a year to get it to their customer. And at the end, they deliver it to their customer, they find out it's not exactly what they wanted, it's not gonna meet the expectations, and so they fire the product manager. Well, if we wanna stop that from happening, we actually have to make it safe and okay for product managers to have decisions and experiments they come up with that are wrong. It is not straightforward at all to offer a successful software product in the market. If it was, there would be new products coming out all the time that are hugely successful. So creating an environment where executives and the accounting side of the house and everybody who's involved in measuring everybody's performance across the company has to change, so that the mindset becomes, we are going to let our product managers and our teams know it's okay if every time you release something, it doesn't have a positive impact. Because the whole point of a release, if we're doing them multiple times a day, or maybe at least once a day, is to get feedback much more frequently from our customer, pivot, adjust, and deliver the right thing. We won't even be able to do that if everybody's so scared of being wrong about something that they're not willing to take risks. And they won't buy into doing more quick releases if they know that, ooh, I might put something out there and it might be wrong and my boss might fire me because of it. So I'm going to talk about this in a future video, and John has some great articles on this as well, and there's a few other people who I also have found through Twitter and other places. I'll include some links below that talk about psychological safety. This is probably one of the biggest challenges you're going to have with shutting down a feature factory, but I think it's crucial that from the accounting to executives to product managers to marketing, everybody has to know that if we're going to start delivering value to customers and let value and outcomes drive how we do work, well, then failure is a normal part of how we're going to work together. And we have to stop looking at failure as a bad thing and failure as a necessary way to learn. The next thing I'll talk about that's really crucial to shutting down feature factories is to stop having teams focus so much on bandwidth and utilization. When you look at a typical Scrum team or Kanban team, one of the first things project managers tend to focus on is how efficient is the team. A given resource, which is really a term I hate, a person, may only have so much time to get work done for a given release. And often the company is really focused on making sure that person's working as hard and as smart as possible. But here's the problem. If we release something to our customer and find out it's not the right thing, we need to quickly jump on that thing we just released and change it. And most teams, if they're focused on efficiency, by the time that feedback comes in, the person who did that feature or change, they're already working on something new. So one of the things that we need to consider, and there's a book out there I've mentioned in several other videos called Principles of Product Development Flow. And this is really one of the books that Jez Humble read that inspired him to write Continuous Delivery. This book has a lot of crazy kind of math and things like that. But if you go into it and you kind of read the arguments and you understand it, I think the author makes one of the best arguments I've ever seen for why focusing on efficiency will actually kill your ability to produce the right product for customers. So this is one of the things that I think you could explore and maybe dig a little deeper into if you need to provide arguments to the rest of your company about why a feature factory is such a problem and why some of these recommendations I'm giving you are something that might be worth exploring. And the last of these things that we can do to shut down a feature factory is to release smaller changes at once quicker. Now, this is a no-brainer. Anybody who's heard about DevOps, continuous delivery, lean product management, all these things I'm talking about on this channel, they've heard of these concepts. But I want you to think a little bit about, why do we do this? Why do we do smaller changes at once if we get the ability to release changes out quickly? Why would that really shut down a feature factory? Well, here's part of the reason. One is, part of the way that teams become a feature factory is when there's not a lot of time spent thinking about the work that we do and whether it hit its outcomes or not. So when a team is not actually taking the time to try to figure out how to measure the impact of their changes, really, I see, and this is just in my experience, a lot of product managers and executives that are involved in designing and coming up with the scope of what's going to be in a product, they try to kind of throw everything but the kitchen sink in there. You know, they try to approve a huge amount of budget, ask for the sun and beyond, and then they just get people working on it. And so it kind of tunes them out from, well, I don't really have to do anything particularly engaging with that feedback because I don't really have any until a release comes out a long time later. Well, if instead the team is only making a small change and releasing it, and then making a small change and releasing it, the speed at which the team's going to get feedback, both positive and negative, is going to go way up. And so it's going to require more engagement from the product management side of the house and anybody else who's involved in looking at the success of the product. And that's actually a good thing. Now, I don't want to leave you with the misconception that having a long release, you know, typical product managers sitting there twiddling their thumbs. I've worked with many of them and they have tons of stuff to do, of course. But from a motivation and behavioral standpoint, it's really important, if we're going to start to adopt the lean mindset and actually deliver to customers what they want by spending as little money as possible, that we keep what we're building and why we're building it and how we're building it, those three things in sync as tight as we can. And the best way to do that is to do small, frequent releases. So what do you think? Have you worked on a feature factory? Have you read some of John's articles and do you have some opinions about them? Is there something that maybe I can help you with related to some things that you've tried to do to shut down a feature factory and you've not had the success that you wanted? You know, I've shared with you a lot on this channel that in the last 10 years of my career in consulting, one of the things I worked a lot on is the ability to convince and persuade people to do things that at first glance are very contrary to how they work. I think you're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to run into much of the same situation. So give me a thumbs up below. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll reach out to John. I'd love to get an interview with him at some point on this channel. I have a few other folks that I'm trying to get some interviews lined up with. But if you're enjoying this type of content, I really encourage you to go out and look up John's articles. He's probably one of the best people out there that's really sharing some things that challenge traditional product management, coming from the product management position and perspective. I'm kind of coming from it maybe a little bit more from the development perspective, since that was typically more my background, especially in the first 10 years of my career. But I think as companies are moving forward and we're starting to develop better and better ways to meet the needs of our customers with how expensive software development has become, getting rid of the culture at your company that prevents people from hitting outcomes and doing work that's of high value and shutting down that feature factory is probably one of the best things you can do. So until next time, thanks.